Consequently, you want to pick it up, flip that over onto that, so that your measured side goes to your measured side, and then you recenter it roughly. Then attach it all down the outside and all down the inside. Take your time doing this because you want to be able to pull up and not have it come off in your hand. And as you can see, I'm pushing down and in a way as to try not to trap air. If you just start right away pulling up before you attach it well, it's going to come flying off in your hand. So the first time I work on it, I'm pushing down. The main reason that I do this on pictures is because in order to have this nice curve come to a distinct change, if I were going to try and throw that all in one go, I would have to leave the wall fairly heavy to support such a dramatic change of direction. And I like pictures which are full of liquid when you use them to be fairly light. Occasionally when the bottoms get too dry and I'm stubborn and go ahead and put the tops on anyway, they'll crack off because this is going to shrink and that's already shrunk, and so they shrink apart. The closer your original piece can be to being wet, the fewer problems you're going to have with drying and shrinkage problems. When I get to the top, if it seems like it's gotten a little thin, I'm pushing it back down, thickening it up. So the bottom is not yet finished. The bottom will come in, but what you're trying to decide right now is it a pleasing proportion from there to there to there to there, and do you like the way the curve reverses? Those are the main things I'm looking at right now. If it's too tall, I can cut the top off. If it's too short, sometimes I can squeeze it a little taller. So I don't like pictures that pout. I like them to be a little perky. So I like to pull up before I lean the edge over. And the reason to pull up is to give it a little lift and also to thin it a bit because it will pour better. You always run a balance between wanting the lip to be thin enough that your rim won't drip and wanting it to be not so thin so that it won't chip. So that's now probably a good thickness, and I'm going to hold on to that as I ease it out. And I went down the neck a little bit because the water will pour better if it has a throat to come up. I've got a line to here that changes to a curve, and what I want to have happen is I want this curve to go all the way to the base, and I am going to now remove that clay and try and continue this angle. And the reason I left that clay there was because if I threw it without and removed this clay earlier on, it would make the base less stable for adding the top onto. There's a lot of pressure and torque involved in throwing a piece of clay on top of a form. So you want to leave your bottom as sturdy as you can and trim it afterwards. If you just bring it right down to the table, it's more earthbound than if you give it a little bit of a shadow line. Most of my pots have a little shadow line at the bottom. One of the wonderful things about clay is if it turns out that this thing is too heavy, you just mush it up and use the clay again. Then the next time I meet this pot, I'll be putting a handle on it. But right now I'm going to run my thumb around the bottom and set it aside. Before I put the handle on, I make sure I run my finger around the bottom, and I like to give the bottom a little bit of a tap, just to make sure that it's sitting flat. Okay, one of the tricky things about putting handles on pitchers is that you want to make sure you're right opposite the spout. A cheat that helps is to put a paintbrush or stick across. Now I am digging fairly deep with my trusty scoring rib. I pulled this handle a while ago, and it is still wet, it's still flexible, but it has lost a little bit of its most wet, slippery aspect. I'm not going to use the whole thing, I'm going to use it starting about here. So I'm going to put it back down on the table and lop it off again, shorter. Then, this is what's going to attach, and you need to thicken it a little bit. The place where people run into trouble with this kind of handle attachment is that they push the handle on the pot and they push it on all at the top, and then you get a weak spot at the top. This pot's still fairly wet, and so I need to have a hand on the inside as I push, or else it will distort. A good sign that your pot is too wet is if you start to put the handle on and the top distorts. But I try and work this as wet as I possibly can, just short of distorting. Now I'm pushing it on quite hard with the hand inside, but I'm pushing along the handle. You should note that I'm keeping the handle at right angles to the pot. You don't want to let it flop up and down a lot until the last pull, when you finally purposely bring it down in a nice arc. The more it comes up and down, the more it weakens at the top. That's, to my eye, that's too big. It comes out too far. So I'm going to just remove a little handle and tighten it down a little bit. Then you need a hand inside the pot so that you can push quite hard. I mean, I'm really applying some force here. And if you don't have a hand on the inside of your pot, you should push hard enough that without a hand in there, it would distort.